set healthy boundaries, when that would ironically make the audience more comfortable with what we are doing. If they feel like we're safe, they feel happier.
Exactly. And unfortunately, that's been one of the problems that immersive theater has been having to deal with as well, is that a lot of performers have been subjected to like assault or harassment by like audience members that took the fantasy too far. And that's where those boundaries should be clearer and performers should feel comfortable sorry, disrupting that illusion or even completely breaking it to establish those boundaries. Another thing too, giving people the tools to say no and feel comfortable doing that actually broadens interactivity as well, because like what happens with a lot of performances, a lot of improv, is that the people that get the interaction are the really eager people. They're like, me, or like the first to raise their hands, or like the first to volunteer. Whereas you have all these shy people who may want to interact, but you know, they don't so vocal about it, like, and they're missing out on all those components because they weren't like the first people to speak up. But if you make people comfortable to say no, then suddenly you have the power that performers and creators have to engage those more shy people, and give them that part of the experience that kind of gets snagged up by all the more extroverted and outgoing people. Like you can just distribute the interactivity a lot more evenly.
Right, because then they feel more comfortable. And I had this experience. I noticed this when I went and did immersive theater, is because I have so much anxiety and I just want to do everything right all the time. And having clear rules of what is expected of me and what I am permitted to do, and especially because I'm also an actor, I don't want to screw things up for the actors. So there was so many like layers of me worrying about it. But if I am given like, this is where you can go, this is what you can do, just through simple social cues or implicit in the dialogue, that makes me way more comfortable. And then I can be my goofy, playful self, but I have to have those rules. So I just personally, I totally am like, yes, please, like, let's define this. Let's, because if you know how to play, it's like, I do this exercise with my improvisers, to teach them about what a game, what's the purpose of having a game and why games have rules, especially in something like improv, like immersive theater, when you have those unexpected elements. I have them play tag. I just have them play tag. And after everybody like runs around for a little bit, inevitably somebody goes and does something like hides in a closet or like goes out of bounds. And I say to everybody, I'm like, okay, we all yelled at this person for going out of bounds. What does that mean? How did we all decide that? And everybody is like, well, they went too far and then we couldn't catch them and that's not any fun. We couldn't play the game. And then everyone's like even especially in a fantasy universe, you have to respect each other enough to stay within rules that make the game more fun. Because if you're that dude who goes out of bounds and hides, you're not going to have any fun.
Exactly. And some people really need those rules laid out, and that's okay. Like, a lot of immersive theater and performers like pride themselves in being able to use gestures and social cues, but that's not so great if you're an audience member that's autistic and you have a lot of trouble registering those things, and that's the primary form of communication. Like, no, like there has to be a multiplicity of cues and boundaries and rules that just give people a somewhat clear picture of how to interact in the space. Because like we've been saying this whole time, having a basic idea, a basic shape of what is allowed is so much more important than all the lines being gone. Because just kind of like, I think with creativity, limits are important in fueling creativity. You know, like having certain boundaries and things you have to adhere to is actually better for creative thought than, you know, being given the prompt, write about anything. Like what does that mean? What are you expecting from me? Like how far off can it go? Like, you know?
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's so important just to have a few subtle but just clear boundaries that really frame the action and kind of like you were saying with tag, kind of define that playing area in a way that can be gently tested, but isn't going to result in some massive, like, how dare you go past this invisible line we drew? Like,
you had no idea that we drew, like,
yeah.
And what I like about immersive, because you know, you made the great point of different people are going to have a different awareness of those lines. Like, you know, I'm way more nervous about lines and have to do more work than most people to pick up on them. And then, like you said, if somebody's autistic or a myriad of things, or like cultural differences, language barriers, etc. But the beautiful thing about what you've been telling us about immersion is that the immersive practitioners can give that one-on-one experience to an audience member that makes sense for them. And I think that's what's cool. Like, if I'm doing an improv show, I can't go out to every person and be like, hey, I'm gonna is this okay? Like, I can't like look every individual in the eye. I have to deal with that group of people as a clump. But with immersion, you can deal with that person as a person, and that's so cool.
Yes. And so for everyone that doesn't know, these are called one-on-ones. They're very popular in immersive theater because it's a very unique interaction. Often they're kind of aspired to because not everyone gets them. Depending on the show, you may be like one of the few lucky people like that just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or specifically chosen by a performer for some reason to have like this really intimate encounter that nobody else gets to experience, which is wonderful. And that allows for so many like mind melting opportunities of just, you know, completely breaking things down, having this cool, intimate encounter, having something that's completely different from everybody else, and really shaping your own narrative in a way that's very special and makes you feel special. But, you know, if there aren't clear boundaries or you don't know how to act in that moment, things can get kind of awkward. And so it's important for a performer to facilitate that. I know my first experience, actually, I was the lucky one to get the one-on-one. And so this fortune teller is breaking character, saying she doesn't know what to do with her life and asking me about choices, difficult choices that I'd made in the past. And she asked me, how did you respond to something difficult in the past? Like, what did you do in that moment? And I was so unprepared for the question. And I felt so pressured to immediately say something that I just said, I ran away and I never looked back. Which I love. Like, that was great. And she had to stifle a laugh, like I could tell. But you know, like audiences, like they can feel pressured to act a certain way. And fortunately, that performer handled it well. She like channeled the humor of that into like her character and made it kind of like a lighthearted moment, which was amazing. But again, it's about facilitating those moments and being very, very careful with audience members, because when you're one-on-one with someone, you are vulnerable. And like you can relate. A lot of people are scared that they're somehow going to mess things up, especially for the show. And so you don't want them thinking about that. You want them in the moment, channeling part of the show and not focusing on committing some kind of social faux pas, doing something wrong, feeling pressured to do something, being violated anyway. Like, you just want to be very respectful, and that it takes a lot of mastery to be able to really shape that moment and to interact with someone in that way. And a lot of these scholars that, you know, I referenced are very clear. This is something that traditional actors are not trained to do. So it takes a very special kind of training to accomplish that, which I think is also why like intimacy direction and that kind of facilitation is so important right now.
Yeah, you really need a different set of, because when you are an actor performing a set script, nobody is going to blame you for what, like, you kind of get to be devoid of responsibility. You're kind of a very well-trained puppet. This is how, when I describe how I feel about being an actor, and maybe I'm not very good, and that's why I describe it like this, but it's you're a very well-trained puppet. You are moving in a way that you're an instrument. The director and the writer are playing you, and it's up to you to, you know, make the song beautiful. But you did not write down the words that are going to make somebody, that are going to trigger somebody. And if somebody walks out of that theater crying, they are not going to blame you. You are not responsible. But as an improviser, or as an immersive theater, especially like when we're talking one-on-one, I feel like improvisers can get away with a little bit more because everybody's like, oh, well, but when you have pulled the audience member on stage, you do not make that you do everything you can to give them a comfortable experience. And that's all that immersive theater is pulling the audience member on stage.
Exactly. And this is why it's like so important to interact with like other fields and like other scholars and other minds, because like, you know, a lot of my thesis I draw on gaming studies, and gaming studies is great, especially when talking about like boundaries and setting those things up for like players and player interaction. But the thing with like a video game is that you're not in it. There's this layer of distancing. So like particularly for consent, I ended up drawing a lot from live action role playing scholars and leaders. And also like this was like a little bit of an overlap, but also there's some minds that come from like BDSM sex party communities where they're having to facilitate a lot of intimacy there, clearly. But we appreciate that. But like that realm of people are used to that improvisation, that scene setting, that not only what's happening as part of the experience, but what's happening before to introduce people into that environment, and what's happening after to end the experience and return people from the fantasy back into real life. Like those transitions should not be neglected. And so those are very, very important as well. So a lot of cool ideas. That's one of the nice things about immersive theaters, that we're not afraid to reach out to those kinds of people though. So that's exciting. But yeah, there's a lot there that is very new, and we're having to pull out all these different straws from different places because these are problems that are very new to people that haven't engaged in those kinds of things.
Yeah, I just think it's a very important thing for comedians. Whatever you're doing, we need to be more considerate about our audiences. You need to be more considerate about your partners, your scene partners, what you're writing. This is a whole other conversation, but the reason I was so excited to talk about this today is because I feel like it's coming up a lot lately of comedians complaining that they're like, oh, there shouldn't be so much scrutiny around what I say. Like, I should just be able to say whatever I want. And then the thing is, you are performing for an audience. You are beholden to the audience, and what your art is 100% audience-based. And if your audience is not enjoying themselves, if the role of player is not enjoying themselves, we're not doing our job. And everything else about our egos or our grand artistic ideas, like if the audience and role to player are not comfortable and not getting something out of the experience, we have not done our job.
Exactly. And there are way more ethical ways of facilitating like a grand transformation, and transformation being a term from LARPers or from those other communities about having that incredible individual experience that almost feels like life-changing in a way. It's very intense. There are just more ethical ways of doing that. unfortunately, like part of my thesis too was like learning immersive theater productions that tried doing something over specific content and it wasn't great, or they subjected their audiences to a lot of intensity that people were not aware of, and people felt really violated coming out of that. It's just like, one immersive theater experience was trying to simulate what it was like to be kidnapped by the Syrian army and to be held as a political prisoner of war. And the problem with that is like ethics, like A, not only the violence inherent in that, but B, thinking that you can simulate something like that.
Yeah.
And then that be somehow akin to the real life experience.
Because it's still a game. It's still playing pretend.
Exactly.
And I can see how that gets complicated. Of like, I'm going to show you exactly what this horrible experience was like, and then you're going to go home.
Exactly. And so it's like sometimes those grand artistic ideas and concepts are not actually worth putting on because they're like unethical or exploitative. There have been other immersive theater pieces that, have gained their ideas from community members, but kind of fit the ideas of certain community that they interacted with into a pre-existing dramaturgy, like a pre-existing structure. And so in that way, you're not really devising a work based on what you learned from a group of people. Instead, you're gathering their stories just to fit a narrative that you've previously constructed, which is not actually telling their stories. That's telling yours. So
I really like the way that Safe House did it. Like I said, very edutaining, because you were brought into the story. It did not attempt to make you a soldier in Africa.
Yes.
It did not try to transplant you into something you could not understand. Through the medium of a spy thriller, you were informed of real problems. And because it was through the spy thriller, there was enough of that element of like fun and I know what's happening here. I've seen spy movies.
Yes.
But there is also that real element of, oh my God, what would I do? How would I respond to this information at this time? Would I be the good guy?
Exactly. And thankfully, like the show very much went in the direction of like F the CIA, because yes, the stuff that they were doing was terrible, and it was completely without congressional authorization. It was nuts. And so but it was a nice critical engagement of what actually happened during that period and the very high stakes involved of going against such a powerful system.
So. And I think audiences are smart. You can talk about anything with them as long as as long as you consider their feelings, their comfort, while you are trying to engage with them. Like this, and at what point is a pretend kidnapping turned into a real kidnapping?
Yes, exactly.
Like you paid for this. Like that doesn't necessarily justify whatever you want to do to an audience member to try to evoke. Because if you're evoking real feelings of fear to try to prove something, you're evoking real feelings of fear.
Exactly. Like it's not necessary. And again, that's where I think audience agency is really important, because people can actively play pretend. Like they can actively imagine things. That's not going to diminish the experience. And most people coming into immersive theater want to play. Or they just need the encouragement to. They're not trying to resist at all costs. Like you have the audience on your side more often than not. So like respect that, trust them, give them the freedom to make their own choices.
So I'm gonna ask you like one last question to wrap this up, and then I'll have you tell people where to find your thesis. But where, and just thank you so much, because I think this is such an important conversation for performers, and I think that immersive theater brings this conversation around consent just like right to the front, and it's something that everybody, I think especially comedians right now, need to be thinking about, just because so much of our craft requires audience feedback and participation, and we seem to bitch about it all the time. But my last question for you is, so where do you see immersive theater going? What is kind of the projection for its development? And what does that mean for theater writ large?
That's a great question, especially because this pandemic has been really interesting. Right. So immersive theater has really often been a lot about live events, but there's a lot more virtual things on the horizon. And that's great because since immersive theater is so inherently experimental and interdisciplinary, a lot of creators have been pivoting focus to make more online interactive versions of immersive theater that still have actor interaction, still have complex story worlds, still have puzzles. So in that way, it's kind of cool because we're able to draw on like alternate reality games, like those online kind of conspiracy theory, but for fun, like puzzle solvers, or different kinds of like adventures that you engage with online, or different medias of online performance that I think traditional theater kind of struggles to do right now. Like a lot of traditional theater is like, how are we going to film this performance when we're all having to social distance, and how is like our costumes not going to do all those things? Like they don't have as many tools for interactivity and for creating that fictional world. And so that's like the immediate, is that a lot of immersive theater is pivoting towards virtual stuff, at least for like the very, very, very near future. In general, as experiences become more popular, I think immersive theater is going to grow in popularity, a lot like escape rooms have, where, you know, 5 years ago, hardly anybody heard of an escape room, and now they're really kind of everywhere. And, you know, you still have people that haven't really heard about them, but at least the concept isn't so foreign. Right. Immersive theater is still very much at that foreign stage right now, where a lot of people don't even know of its existence. So I think that's going to change. That's going to allow for some new opportunities. I think that the marketplace for it is going to become more diversified. And it's not going to be something that's just limited to essentially Los Angeles, New York, and some tiny enclaves in specific cities. Like, no, I think it'll become a much greater sort of movement. I do think that as it expands and we get more experience and we have more repertoire, you're also going to see genre differentiation as well. And so like in the UK, they already have immersive productions that have covered all sorts of like genres and whatnot. In the US, immersive theater is still so new that even though I've been talking about some cool experiences, these are very new and kind of break from the norm. The scene here in Los Angeles came out of the haunted house scene. So much of the original immersive productions here, and the ones that are most popular, like Delusion and Creep LA, are still horror-themed experiences. And only now are we getting like the spy thriller stuff, like the crazy indie feel stuff. Like, so I think that that's just going to multiply. And we're going to start to see other ways of implementing immersive theater, like through soundscapes and sound art and visual art, really kind of come into the fold as well. And, you know, lastly, I think one of the problems that immersive theater is facing right now is that it's still finding its way to be a sustainable, profitable model. And so even though a lot of immersive theater companies are not functioning like nonprofits, they're using ticket prices, their rotation of shows is very sparse, and there tends to be significant down periods, and it's hard to develop a consistent fan base. Notable exception being a company based out of the UK like Punch Drunk that is put on like Sleep No More in New York, where that runs year round. But that's a big warehouse that they've bought. That they're able to constantly cycle people through. They're very business minded. That's the exception rather than the rule right now. So I think we'll see immersive theater companies start to get more business savvy, and that will hopefully lead to a more consistent market with recurring shows and experiences that people can really go to, which I think is just going to lead to greater clout for immersive theater too. Like, lots of people have heard of Sleep No More, and that's very important because it then becomes like cultural capital, versus like if you have an immersive production that runs for just like 3 or 4 weeks, you know, it then becomes like hard. It's still a cool thing, but you know, it's harder to like share that thing. Or
you need it to be going long enough that people who see it can tell their friends and then send their friends to come see it, and then you can make that money.
Exactly. And then, you know, if you have a show that's able to be open longer, then that helps this become more of like a cultural movement and a new medium for art that people become accustomed to. So, you know, I think it's going to grow in prominence. It's still very much in its infancy right now.
Where's the best place for somebody to, they're really interested in immersive theater, where online should they go to check out what's going on?
Absolutely. So, primary source is going to be, especially for the US, it's going to be a website called No Proscenium. Proscenium being based off of proscenium theater, so that little box that goes around it. We're saying no, none of that. So No Proscenium, people call it No Pro for short. If you go on there, they have the listings of everything immersive, including into like the ARG realm, that's going on within the US currently. And they have great articles as well, written by wonderful practitioners. And so you can get your scholarly interest there too. Like, to call it a blog does it misjustice, because it really has become like a central hub for immersive people. There are also immersive groups like on Facebook that are very important. The most popular, I believe, is called Everything Immersive. There may be regional ones as well. Those are great to follow because, again, because shows are short-lived, it's hard for these shows to sometimes find audiences. So if you're going to these places, you're going to actually find the shows that are happening near you, things that you can hop in on. And there's a few other like sites, like there's haunting.net, which is way more geared toward horror, but they definitely have gone to the immersive realm as well. So particularly if you want that immersive experience, but with like a haunted house or horror kind of experience, haunting.net will have some very interesting resources as well.
Awesome. And last thing I'm going to ask you, and then I'll let you go. How does somebody find your thesis? How does somebody go read it?
Absolutely. So I have my thesis completely available for download. Can you attach a link to this conversation?
I can make the title of it a link. I don't think I have the ability to when I share this on social media. I will be able to give everybody the link.
There we go. So however you found this video, audience viewer, just find the link that's attached. It will take you to Google Drive, and you can download my thesis there as a PDF. Or if you're feeling super fancy, visit the University of Houston thesis repertory, go to the theater school, theater department, and look under recent theses. Mine will be there. It has just been published as of spring 2020.
Nice. All right, thank you so much, Roby Johnson, everybody. Gave us lots of great info about immersive theater. I know I'm jazzed now, and I'm so happy that I got a chance to share with all my lovely viewers this really interesting stuff about immersion and consent. Thank you so much, Roby, for coming on.
Of course.
Yay! Yay!